So, I just finished reading Salem's Lot by Stephen King, and I don't know what to rate this thing. Um, the first 150 pages or so, I didn't really like it. I was bored because it kept changing POVs a lot, and it made me worried about the Malazan series if it's going to be like that. Like, I can't keep up with all the different characters because he's going through all these different characters, talking about the town a lot, of Jerusalem's a lot, which is what this means. It was named after this pig named Jerusalem who got loose into the woodlot, and I don't know what that had to do, why they named a town after a pig. But Salem's Lot is what they called it, and so it kind of reminded me of It a little bit, how Derry was kind of like a character even though it was a town. So I thought maybe Salem's Lot's going to be like the character in this. It's going to be like a town. I mean, I knew this was supposed to be about vampires when I first got it. But then I'm 150 pages in and they haven't mentioned vampires at all. I'm like, wait, did I get this confused with the Lost Boys with Kiefer Sutherland? Maybe this isn't about vampires. Because they keep talking about this place called the Marston House, which is a house on the cover and it's on fire. So I'm thinking maybe this is like a haunted house story. I mean, I got it confused. And this guy, Richard Throckett Straker, shows up, and he's like this foreigner from Europe who's like trying to deal expensive furniture. And he supposedly has a partner that's on a buying trip in Europe. And he reminded me a lot of the character from Needful Things that has the antique store. So that was kind of weird. He also reminded me of the bald guys from that Fringe TV show, you know, like the Men in Black sort of kind of character. Really strange guy. So I thought maybe this guy could be a vampire. So then you're going through all these different characters, you know, like there's a kind of gay boy that beats up a bully with his agility. It's really dope. There's a guy at the dump who kind of reminded me of the trash can man from The Stand. He was shooting rats a lot. There's these two boys that kind of get lost in the woods and they get killed, and one of them gets sacrificed, and the other one gets sick and he dies in the hospital later. So different characters like that. And you meet Ben Mears, who's like a writer. I guess he's supposed to represent Stephen King's personality or something maybe. And he meets this girl, Susie Norton. They start a relationship. I kind of got into their characters really good, so then I got into the book. So about 150 pages in, I really started liking it. And then it went from like a 3-star to like a 4.5, maybe 5-star book. And it was really easy to read. I started liking it. It started talking about the vampires finally. I'm like, oh, it really is about vampires. It's cool. And then it turned into like different layers or levels of like how a vampire story typically unfolds. And these are like Bram Stoker style vampires that you have to like stake them with a wooden stake, cut off their head, put garlic in their mouth, turn their head around backwards, put them in running water. I don't know if you have to do that. Maybe it's just the head vampire you have to do that. But like that's how they figure out you're supposed to do it. And there's also this teacher named Matt. He's like an older guy. He's really smart, and he knew all this stuff from reading a lot of books at the library. He's like getting in. He was like the lore guy. They said he's reminded them of Van Helsing, but then he also said something about somebody else. Anyway, I can't remember. So the town, it kind of goes through stages where first they discover there's vampires. Then you have to like convince other people that there's vampires. And then they kind of get a group together that's starting to form like a quartet, kind of like in the Dark Tower. Because that's the whole reason I wanted to read this book. It's because the character Father Callahan from this story is in the Dark Tower. And there was a mention of like something about in his past he had to climb a staircase or something. I didn't know if that was talking about like the Stand happened in the past and then this happens in the future. Pretty sure the Stand happens after this, because it's mentioned something in the Dark Tower about him being from Jerusalem's Lot and the stuff that happened there or something like that. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, so then you go through they find there's vampires, you gotta convince people there's vampires, and then there's the stage of where they start trying to figure out how they're going to kill the vampires, and they realize that time is running out. And every night that they're not killing vampires, more people in the town are being turned. So it's a numbers game. Like, they're starting to realize, oh, we're fucked. We're losing. We're way behind on this. They've already gotten the upper hand on us. And this main vampire, his name is Barlow. He's the guy that's supposed to be on the buying trip to Europe. He was actually like, the first guy was just like the Renfield. He's like a regular human who's doing the bidding of his master. And the main vampire, Barlow, is like at nighttime he's coming around turning everybody into vampires. So then you have like the kid that was in the hospital that died. Not those sacrificed. When he becomes a vampire. He starts turning into somebody. And then one of the main characters gets turned into a vampire, and it kind of fucks up the whole group thing. You're thinking, oh, this is gonna be a cool group. Everybody get their weapons together and like go on a vampire hunt. It's gonna be dope. And then one of them gets turned. You're like, oh shit. So then things start to fall apart a little bit. So then Stephen King is not known for making good endings. Like the Tommyknockers didn't really end very well. The alien spaceship just kind of took off into space. The Stand was pretty good. The Mist was a really weird ending, but it was really good. But a lot of his endings are just like not satisfying. It's like he makes a big mess, like a child playing with his toys, and he doesn't clean up his room when he's done. He doesn't like leave you satisfied that the hero has won the day, and like, so things go bad. That's the whole point of this story, is that Salem's Lot is a town that goes bad. And it does not turn out well. Father Callahan, he starts doing some cool ass priest stuff. He have faith children, and he brings up this crucifix, and he's like smiting the vampires, like he's melting locks off and some weird like power of God stuff. And then it's like, well, the light just starts to fade, and he starts to lose his faith, and he's like, oh no. And then the vampires force him to drink some of their blood, so now he's unclean and he can't go into his church anymore. The doors have been locked to him. It hurts. It electrocutes him if he tries to go in. So he gets depressed, and he was already like an Irish priest who drinks. So he just gets on a bus and drives off. Like, fuck this place. I'm not coming back. He gives up. And I think that's how in the Dark Tower they kind of like pull him in. As a guy who's like given up on life or something. You expect him to be a hero and like save the day, and I'm like, no, not gonna do it. And then they find some holy water at the church, and they kind of get a little bit of glowing power. Ben and this other kid, I can't remember if it's the gay kid or if it was a different kid. There's this Mike Ryerson guy who I thought he died, but then maybe he came back. There was another kid, Mark. Yeah, Mark and Mike. I can't tell these kids apart. So they find this doctor guy who's helping Matt. Matt's just kind of in the hospital doing research. And the doctor and Ben and Mark are all like the group that are going to try to kill the vampires. And this is where it gets kind of stupid. I'm like, Matt says, we're going to need a lot of stakes to kill these vampires. I'm thinking 3 or 4, maybe 500 stakes. So, like, they find this wooden lathe in the bottom of somebody's house. He's like, I'm going to use this lathe to make the stakes. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's going to take so long. Every piece of wood, you got to put a piece of stove wood in a lathe and tighten it down. And, like, then you got to, like, on the end to make like a steak, and like it's like going to take a half an hour per steak to make 500 steaks. What are you talking about? Do you have to like steak the vampire and just leave it in there forever? You can't just pull it out and reuse it? What are we doing? So, and then they find out where the main vampire is at, and he had a trap set with a piece of wood with a bunch of knives stuck through it. And the doctor, he leaves the first 2 steps on the stairs going down to the basement, and he cut all the other stairs off, so he just falls on these knives and he's fucking dead. Spoiler alert. So, okay, the doctor's dead. The other character's gone. This guy's in the hospital. I think he ends up, I don't remember if it said he died or not. I'm assuming he did. He must have, because the whole town eventually gets killed. So then you just got Ben and Mark left. Ben and Mark, how are they going to do this? They end up finding the main vampire and killing him. But they're also kind of experimenting by, like, the kid has this idea, like maybe if we drag him out into the sun, it'll be way easier than making 500 steaks. So they drag one of them out as an experiment. The body's just kind of doing this. He's like, and they're like, oh, that's gross or weird. So let's just drag it back in the house into the shade, put it back in its hidey hole, and lock him back up. Like, why would you do that? What in the fuck are you doing? That's not how you kill vampires. You just drag them out into the sun and then you put them back in their hidey holes? Like, what the hell? That was one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Besides the 500 steaks on a lathe. So then, like, they're just running out of time, and they finally kill the main vampire, and now it's just like, they're like, yeah, but there's all these other vampires that the main vampire made, but we ain't got time to kill all those. So they just give up, and they leave. So that's the end of the story. They leave, and, I'm assuming Matt died in the hospital. I can't remember. I think he did. There's some other people in the town, like the sheriff. He kind of figured out there was vampires, but he just kind of gave up too. He was like, well, I'm getting out of here. I ain't gonna mess with these vampires. And there's this woman who had like a St. Christopher's medal, and I think she might have gotten killed. I don't know. But they left. And then the story kind of ends. And then you get an epilogue, and you see all these news stories of like all these people, families gone missing in the town, and people are starting to like get confused, like why are so many bad things happening in Salem's lot, and like all these people are missing, and people are getting killed in weird ways, and they're being found exsanguinated, and animal mutilations, all this kind of stuff. And then the boy and Mark and Ben, they're driving back to Salem's lot. They finally gotten some courage up maybe or something, and they're like, they heard a long time ago there was a fire that went through the town, and it like was uncontrollable, so they just like throw a cigarette into some leaves in the same spot where it started years and years ago when the wind was blowing a certain direction. Like, I'm sure that'll happen again. And then they just like decide to like leave again to let the fire kind of burn out all the hidey holes so they can go back later, and then they'll start killing all these extra vampires, because once they lose their hidey holes, then they're just going to hide in really easy to find spots, apparently. And then, I don't know why this doesn't mean, like, it kind of makes it sound like they're all trapped in Jerusalem's lot. Like, they can't leave. I mean, they got 12 hours of night every day. They could just go to some other town and start a whole new plague of vampires in the next town over. And then take the vampires from that town to the next town, and just like over and over and over again. Just started like a plague across America. I don't know why they seem like they're trapped in this one town. Doesn't make any sense. I guess you have to have a Renfield helping you out, like a human transporting you in a box everywhere. I mean, that's just to get across the ocean. I don't know. It's just... Imagine if you had to take every vampire, turn his head backwards with garlic, and drop him in a river in a coffin that's been weighted down with rocks. And the rivers would be so polluted with vampires. Like, what if the river dries up one day? The vampire's good again? They can just pop right out? Or does the water not get polluted by vampires evil or something? Or what are we doing? They don't like accidentally find like a coffin in the water? Somebody's gonna like lift it out of the river eventually someday? I don't know. This doesn't make sense. Kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, but maybe I give it 4 stars. It went from a 3 to a 5, and I'm gonna drop it back down to a 4 because it just ended bad. It was this part right here, from about here to about here. This much of the book is really good and enjoyable. This part was kind of meh. This part's like a little, what the fuck? But this part right here is pretty good. We're like 5 stars for this big chunk.